Hi people. I'm going to resist the temptation to make a whole string of videos here, but I think each one is relevant, so I'm making 3 videos tonight. The one I've just made, this one, and the one following. The one that's going to follow is I'm going to talk about the issue of public empowerment, and it's definitely related to this. It's definitely overlap, but it's a little bit more specific. Um, okay, I'm just going to read out this report from LBC because I think it warrants a lot of questions, and as always, I'll comment on this afterwards. So just read this out. It's from a few days ago, from the 8th of August, from LBC News, and it was reported on other sources as well. The report's by Megan Hinton. Police chief has scrapped a controversial hate crime awareness course, which gave alleged offenders the chance to avoid prosecution. Previously, people accused of racism, sexism, misogyny, and transphobia in Hampshire would have been offered a 2 hour educational session instead of prosecution, but the course has now been scrapped following concerns that it was being used in order to challenge a person's legitimately held political beliefs. The course is funded out of the Police and Crime Commissioner's budget, but new PCC Donna Jones has pulled the plug and saying she wants restorative justice solutions used in the right way. It comes after Hampshire police faced criticism. That's Hampshire Constabulary, I think is their formal title, after offering the course to a 51-year-old army veteran after he retweeted a meme which depicted 4 LGBT pride flags positioned to make a swastika. I'll come to that in a minute, like the nature of it. The veteran was informed about the course before an investigation had been conducted and was subsequently released with no further action. Footage of the arrest was widely shared on social media by campaigner Lawrence Fox and former police officer Harry Miller. Harry Miller, I believe, is from Hull, and he was also arrested, or officers turned up to his door over alleged transphobia. Um, there's a tweet there from Reclaim the Media, exclusive the inside story behind the shameful arrest of Army veteran Darren Brady. Watch as the Bad Law Project fights back against the corrupt police forces. Shows a rainbow flag. It's a 40-second clip, and it just shows it's a little bit sensationalist, that clip. So it shows, yeah, it doesn't give a lot of detail really. A spokesman for Hampshire Constabulary said, "We can confirm that officers explained that the hate crime awareness course would be offered as an alternative to prosecution in the event that the alleged offence was admitted." PCC Jones told the Telegraph on Sunday, "I inherited a restorative justice contract when I was elected into office last year, and the restorative hate crime awareness course was part of that. I've decided that this hate crime awareness course will no longer be offered in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight by way of a community resolution option. The change needs to be planned properly, but what will take place in the coming weeks. In saying this, I want to be clear that when someone has been targeted and suffers violence or abuse because of their protected characteristics, and the incident reaches the evidential threshold for a hate crime, perpetrators can expect police action. This is vital." But what she's talking about is violence or abuse. This is a very, very important thing. I'll come back to it. Harry Miller, a former police officer who recently won a High Court case against the College of Policing over the way alleged non-hate crime incidents are recorded, was also arrested after claiming tried to prevent the army veteran from being detained. Um, Harry Miller is from Hull, so this isn't strictly to one police force. College of Policing guidelines define a hate incident as any non-crime incident perceived by the victim or any person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice against a person who is transgender or perceived to be transgender. He told Mail Online, "We welcome the intervention of the PCC, but the police should never have been acting as a judge and jury in the first place. The public don't need re-educating by woke coppers who think it's their job to be moral and political guardians." I'm going to quote that line again. This is extremely important. College of Policing guidance defines a hate incident as any non-crime incident which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice against a person who is transgender or perceived to be transgender. This is the thing. This actually has a chilling implication for freedom of speech, because that is so vague and so abstract that it almost amounts to a British equivalent of the blasphemy laws in Pakistan or the Thai lèse majesté laws. I'm not talking about the punishment. Clearly, it's not going to be anything comparable to that. Someone's not going to go to prison for years for a thought crime. But the very implication of legal involvement, basically in people's political viewpoints, is absolutely outrageous and sinister. And there needs to be a heavy, heavy pushback against it. Now, Lawrence Fox, I don't agree with all his positions. I don't agree with his anti-vax stuff, and I think sometimes the way he delivers things isn't particularly helpful in the way he goes about things. But um, I'll give him credit for raising awareness of stuff like this because it's just outrageous. Now, the fact the man's a veteran, that's a little bit of tabloid fodder. Frankly, I'd say the same thing if he was a veteran or not. But I guess the implication is this is a man who served his country and this is how he's being treated. But I think a veteran can commit a serious offence as well. It's not. So I wouldn't weigh too much on that aspect of it. But it's the fact that he shared this tweet. It was obviously offensive to some people. He's getting police knocking on his door. Now, I haven't seen the tweet. I imagine it was a bit crass, or, if it's showing pride flags in a swastika formation. But does something like that really warrant police investigation, police time? And the fact that they gave him a choice. I mean, that sounds like a totalitarian state. You either comply with us or you go to a re-education camp. 2 hours of re-education, that's effectively what it is. It's outrageous, and I think it should be scrapped altogether. I think these so-called hate incidents, if they're not criminal offences, they should be scrapped. Just take it off the statute completely. Completely. The only way someone should be investigated is if they're making threats. If they're making threats. Say, for example, this guy had sent threats to the local pride event, or he had, you know, persistently bullied an individual. Yeah, then I think he should face some consequences because you can't behave that way, in a civilized society. But a democracy allows for freedom of expression. That's the bottom line. In the end of the day, I fear that people will use their protected status as a way to deny others legitimate free expression. There's a very big difference between someone holding an offensive view or a view that could be considered an offensive versus deliberately seeking to hurt someone. So, for example, if you have a Christian who says they don't believe in gay marriage, they think it's a sin in the Christian faith, that's an honest opinion. Now, you might not agree with it, you might say it's bigoted, and perhaps it is, but that's a sincerely held view. I do not agree that they should be visited by thought police. Absolutely not. Now, if they extend that to, say, go to a pride event and harass people partaking in that pride event, if they were to hold up banners outside an LGBT social group or something, that could be seen as harassment. But simply holding a view, this is a sinister overreach. It really, really is. Because freedom of expression, peaceful freedom of expression, is one of the most sacred things we have in a democracy. And this is not the first police force to instill this sort of nonsense. Merseyside Police had this absurd billboard saying it is a criminal offence to be offensive or something along those lines. They took it down after being roundly ridiculed. Frankly, I think there are too many police superintendents who are seemingly guided by woke ideology. People want to see the police arresting hardened criminals. That should be what policing is about. Dangerous criminals, violent criminals, not knocking on people's doors because of Twitter feuds. I think Kimmy Badenoch was absolutely right to highlight this. But the government, for all their this is one thing about the Tories. They rail against woke ideology. This is happening on their watch. This is happening on their watch. So I think the government could do a lot more to speak out against it. I'm sick of woke police forces. And, I'm not someone who is anti-police. I don't like to criticize the police. I think they have a very difficult job. And I sympathize with junior officers who have no choice. But if this is something that is kind of in the guidelines, if a police officer has this choice of, okay, let's respond to this call where someone's been burgled or someone's been assaulted, or let's go to this address where this guy has retweeted a rude image. What is the priority? That's what I'd like to ask Hampshire Constabulary. What are they prioritizing? I checked the Facebook page, and they have plenty of legitimate things there, missing people cases and rape and murder and serious crimes. Good. But clearly these officers, maybe they were just following guidelines, but it rests at the top. It really does come down to this PCC, criticizing her own force. There's something fundamentally wrong going on here. See, my battery's low. I may have to move into the other room, but this is happening too much, far too much. British Transport Police, whilst they're busy virtue signalling, and I have to say it's particularly on the Pride thing, or while they're busy giving cups of tea to eco-extremists, the public just want to see action. They just want to see, for example, Insulate Britain activists dragged off the road because they're posing a danger, not pandered to. People don't want to see police money spent on virtue signalling. It is not the police's role to be moral custodians in the sense of, lecturing people about LGBT rights or race relations or anything else. The police are part of society, and of course they need to correspond with marginalised groups. I totally, totally appreciate that, and of course they need to give reassurance to marginalised groups that they will protect them and take hate crime seriously. But I say there is a world of difference between some thugs harassing, say, a gay couple, um, threatening a gay couple, versus someone saying they don't agree with gay marriage online. There's a world of difference. And frankly, the LGBT lobbies also need to stop thinking that they can take away freedom of speech from others just because they are a marginalized group. Having that status doesn't mean you have the right to take away others' freedom of conscience. And I would say that to them. I think groups like Stonewall have been weaponizing the law for a very long time now, and it's concerning. Um, this is really a serious concern because when you start seeing freedom of conscience weaponized this way, now the caveat, of course, is I was talking about Alex Jones and the state being prosecuted for his vile conspiracy theories about Sandy Hook. So this gets into the realm of where is the responsibility and what should the consequences be if someone's words can be proven to be hurtful to such an extent that it's ruining lives. I mean, the thing with Alex Jones is his free speech, his lies, had a direct consequence on other people. But I don't think we should legislate hurt feelings. Even another video I was talking about recently, the whole thing about ghosting, I mentioned that Filipino congressman, he was proposing to make ghosting a crime. As much as I abhor ghosting, that's the sort of thing that is difficult to legislate on. Ultimately, I don't think we can legislate on feelings. I just don't. I think if someone's being obnoxious, if they're being a bully, if they're being, you know, just unpleasant, I think they should be fiercely challenged. But there is just too much control out there. It's the same with social media platforms. Well, in fact, in those cases, it's inconsistency. It's an inconsistency of how they go about things. I mean, Facebook has penalised me for defending myself because I called someone an idiot because they misquoted what I said and they falsely accused me of racism. But you just have to look at where the priorities lie. I mean, if a black footballer gets racist abuse, you can guarantee there's going to be a whole convoy of police officers will follow that up. There'll be widespread condemnation, and the culprit could even face prison time. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that football does need to act against racist louds. I think they should be banned from matches, maybe fined. I think there should definitely be consequences. But is that really something that requires prison time versus, for example, someone actually suffering a violent racist attack? I think one reason people are so utterly disillusioned in this country is because there is a clear lack of consistency. There's bad laws like this, where it is bad laws when we're starting to see the police taking it on themselves to tell people what they can and cannot think. And it's all about context, because then you have groups like Auditing Britain, which I think they take it too far the other way, where they go around harassing police officers and saying they can film wherever they like. That's absurd. In the end of the day, we all have responsibility, but I just think that cases like this show that too many police forces, in this case it's Hampshire Constabulary, but frankly it could be any others, a lot of police forces are engaging in this sort of nonsense. They're not putting the priorities in the right places. Instead of tackling teenage thugs, they're tackling 51-year-old army veterans who send unpleasant tweets. I don't agree with what the man tweeted. If it was crass, if it was, I don't agree with that. But I will support his freedom of conscience to tweet it if he agrees with the message behind it. I think the only time that freedom of speech should be curtailed is if there is a clear threat or there is evidence that it is causing real distress or harm to another person, i.e., if it's bullying, persistent bullying. I even think when we look at areas of power, this is something else which people have to have the right to express anger and concerns. I fear one thing that could happen is because of that awful incident that happened last year, Sir David Amos MP being murdered, we could possibly see laws coming into. I mean, I'm going to cite this in my next video. To curtail people even expressing concerns. I get very, very uneasy when I see messages like, um, "You cannot send offensive messages," or this law about malicious communication. Now, what the hell does that mean? Because one person expressing concerns or expressing frustrations, that could be deemed malicious communication when all they are trying to do is express their democratic rights to raise contentions. That's very different from sending threatening messages. I'm going to wrap this up, but definitely there needs to be a big pushback against this sort of nonsense. I think police forces who do it need to be roundly condemned for wasting public money that could be better spent on tackling crime. And I have to say, the police do themselves no favours with this. You know, they are in a very difficult, stressful, demanding job. They do themselves no favours with this sort of nonsense because then the public lose sympathy and they think, well, our police are useless. And of course, it doesn't show the whole picture. Of course, there will be police risking their lives and in difficult circumstances. I know that. The problem is the public won't see that. They'll see this sort of nonsense. But that's on the police. It's their choice to do this. It's their choice to be woke. It's their choice to police people's thoughts. I don't really accept this line, oh, we're just following government guidelines. No, this is coming from the College of Policing, or is that what's called? Yeah, the College of Policing. I mean, this is particularly concerning. A hate incident, any non-crime incident which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice against a person who is transgender or perceived to be transgender. Well, if it's not a bloody crime, the police have no business investigating it. That should be the bottom line. I mean, you could have someone who is hypersensitive by nature. They think that they've been victimized because they disagree with what someone else has said. They could, in theory, because they're in minority status, have that person facing legal consequences. I think that is really outrageous. And I'm saying this as someone who abhors bullying, but it is so vital that we get this balance right. And at the moment, I think it is going in the direction of curtailing freedom of conscience. Look, I've no time for bullies. I've no time for obnoxious, unpleasant people who will deliberately try to hurt others. But we have to acknowledge that people have different opinions, and some of those opinions are going to be offensive. So, honestly, if you're gay and you see a Christian saying they disagree with gay marriage, no, that doesn't make you a victim. It means that you disagree with what they're saying, and it might be hurtful, but it doesn't give you a right to say that person should be arrested. I demand they go to jail. And vice versa, the Christian can't say, gay rights offend me, so I'm a minority, therefore the gay person should be apprehended. Of course, that wouldn't happen. That's not the sort of thing we're seeing, but I'm just putting it out there as role reversal. Let me know your thoughts.